Chapter 3: Who's Ready in Today's Students in a Diverse Society? In some ways, children never change. The pictures of children in classic literature are as true as today as when they were first written. Look at the convincing, mischievous Tom Sawyer, the obvious, curious Alice in Wonderland, the tempestuous Mafuduo in Call It Courage, or the foolish Juan Bobo. These characters are enduring to us because part of we have our certain stages, cognitive, social, emotional, yesterday's children tomorrow. Certain stages considered social, emotional, and physical development have been identified in some progression through these stages occurrence for everyone. We have a basic psychological and physical needs to cut across radical culture, age, ability, and gender boundaries. You learn a great deal about these subjects in our courses in child or adolescent development and educational psychology. As a teacher, understanding these stages of development and areas of common needs give you insight into student behavior and helps to develop appropriate classroom experiences. Even so, it is also important to be sensitive to the great difference among students to the factors in a society that are directly affecting their lives. In this chapter, we hope to make you more fully aware of the diversity in our society and our classrooms and the range of abilities among the students you will encounter, and schools' attempts to address all these areas of diversity. We also hope to make you more aware of the sensitive and distortive issues, potential problems, and benefits related to this diversity. Sources of student diversity. Some of your students may speak a primary language other than English. We will see parents, educators, and policymakers have become divided, often bitterly so, over the best way to teach these English language learned in the U.S. public schools. Another dimension of diversity will be seen in the academic ability, achievements, and learning styles of your students. Some students will enter the school environment and immediately do well. Others will appear not to respond to your teaching. One of the biggest challenges as a teacher, you provide a variety of learning experiences. Students in your classroom will develop at different rates and display diverse needs. Recognizing these needs will help you better understand some student behaviors and increase your insights on how to respond. Regardless of your own beliefs on the subject of homosexuality, if you are going to teach in the public schools, you may very well teach lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender LGBT students, work with LGBT fellow educators, or interact with LGBT families. As a teacher, you will be challenged to establish and maintain a safe and supportive classroom environment for these and all of your students. Your students will come from families with varied socioeconomic backgrounds. The benefit of being a child from a family in higher socioeconomic class often shows up in the school performance. Children such as families typically do much better academically than students those families in lower socioeconomic classes. Teachers in schools are challenged to help students from these families. These topics discussed in more detail chapter 4 what social problems affect today's students. White Americans and immigration patterns are contributing to the increasing size of the minority population. These national averages disguise the fact that minority groups are unequally distributed across the country. For example, minority groups in the majority in California, Texas, New Mexico, Hawaii, and District of Columbia, whereas minorities constitute less than 10% of the population in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Iowa, West Virginia, and the 47 urban school districts constitute the great city schools, including those in New York City, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Overwhelmingly, the majority of students are from the minority groups. As might be expected with increasing cultural diversity, teachers will encounter more students with the native languages, not English, and whose ethnic cultural backgrounds in Hispanic or also heritage. We discuss the English language learners in the later chapter. Students from biracial and multiracial backgrounds represent a small but growing segment of the U.S. population. These students often face unique issues as being asked to declare single racial identity, thereby denying the rest of their heritage. Tiger Woods, an example, such as an individual declared himself to be a Calvinism, a mixture of Caucasian, Black, American, Indian, and Asian students without the international renown of the Tiger Woods may face rejection from both members of the mainstream culture and members of the radical ethnic minority groups. With the development of a richer, more varied society, differences in values and family expectations are also more evident. For example, some families may place a premium on a school or higher education, where other families may emphasize early entry into the workplace. Even though you will encounter a range of familial expectations from school achievements, be aware that all children deserve the best educational experience they can get while in school. Recognition of racial and ethnic differences can provide an understanding and an insight needed to be more effective construction. Cultural pluralism, not there yet. At one time, in the United States, we considered a melting pot of many different kinds of people. Immigrants were expected to give up their language and customs of the homelands and adopt the language and customs of the new country. During the 19th and early 20th century, schools contributed to the melting pot concept in socializing agriculturing immigrant children to American ways while discouraging them from maintaining their ways of the homeland. Some states, while discouraging them from maintaining the ways of the homeland, okay, but English, the basics, ideas, way to produce a society with one dominant culture. This process of incorporating immigrants into the mainstream culture is often referred to as enculturation or assimilation. Many European immigrant groups were easily assembled into the dominant American culture, but people of color were often prevented from doing so. The concept of melting pot has generally been replaced by the notion of the cultural pluralism, which calls for an understanding and appreciation of the cultural differences and languages among U.S. citizens. The goal is to create a sense of society's wholeness based on the unique strengths of each of its parts. Cultural pluralism rejects both assimilation and separation, a philosophy that suggests each cultural group should maintain its own identity without trying to fit in overall American culture instead of seeking healthy interaction among the diverse groups in our society. That in each subculture maintains its own individuality while it contributes to the society as a whole. As some commentators put it, cultural pluralism argues replacing the melting pot metaphor with a mosaic tapestry or salad bowl in which individual multicultural education. Multicultural education represents one approach to meeting the educational needs of an increasingly diverse student population. Multiculturalism education is an idea, an educational reform movement and process whose major goal is to change the structure of educational institutions so that the male and female students, exceptional students, and students who are members of the diverse racial, ethnic, language, and cultural groups will have an equal chance to achieve academically in school. Spurred by civil rights movement in the 1960s, multicultural education is a response to economic inequality, racism, and sexism in American culture. Originally used in the conjunction with the notion of improving a lot of people of color, this term has been broadened and include gender. Multicultural education is not just for members of the minority, radical, or ethnic groups, but for all the students, including those from the Western European heritage. A major of the goal of multicultural education is to help students of the diverse cultures learn to cross cultural borders and to participate in a diverse democratic society. True multicultural education does not consist of only black history or women history months instead of simply adding information about particular groups to the curriculum and having the rest of the untouched. Real manufactured education presents multiple perspectives and viewpoints to help students understand how various groups can interrupt events and facts differently. In addition to valuing cultural diversity, multicultural education is based on the concept of social justice, which seeks to do every way of social economic inequalities for those who in the past have been denied these benefits in dramatic society. African Americans, African American Indians, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, mixed race individuals, women, individuals with disabilities, people with limited English proficiency, people with low incomes, members of particular religious groups, and individuals who've been denied social justice. An ongoing debate. These critics do not argue against the need to preserve the value of achievements of the diverse ethnic and racial groups in the United States, but they reject the position that everything is equal, that the schools have a responsibility to teach every possible belief in the values, the behaviors, and moral if it is believed to be so by the group. They assert there is limits to pluralism, that those limits must be articulated by schools and school leaders. In addition, these critics believe that these who lose most of multicultural education are minorities and immigrants themselves. Clearly, the notion of multicultural education is not without controversy. Multicultural education has often been cast as a reform movement designed to address discrimination resulting from their race, religion, socioeconomic status, gender, age, expressionality, or language of students. As as with as many of the schools' problems, X's over absence concur. Nevertheless, schools do need to accommodate larger minority population in a way that removes barriers and enables those students to compete academically, economically, while preserving the basic purpose of schooling. Teaching implications. One preferred method for teaching who wants to acknowledge and accommodate cultural diversity in the classroom is culturally responsive teaching. Many educators have documented how cultural identity communication styles, and social expectations of students from minority culture groups often conflict with the value beliefs and cultural assumption of teachers. These school middle class culture often place students from other cultures at a disadvantage in understanding the school's cultural codes and communication styles. Teachers who reorganize a problem can implement an equity pedagogy, a style of teaching that uses instructional materials and practices that incorporate important aspects of their students, family, and community culture. For example, a teacher whose class contains mostly immigrant children from Central America can place maps of both Latin America and the United States around the room, provide magazines and games in both Spanish and English, and play salsa music as backgrounds for certain activities. This teacher might also recognize that for many students from a Latin culture, establishing direct eye contact with an adult authority figure is a sign of disrespect. So does she have not expectation of her students, knowing that understanding your students' cultural backgrounds can help you make your classroom more investigating in the students' academics achievements? More than 5.3 million limited English proficient students, or stated more positively, English language learners, are enrolled in public elementary and secondary schools. 11% of the total enrollment, and this number has increased by every year of the last decade. The majority of all ELL students are concentrated in the states of California, Texas, New York, and Illinois across the United States. You might think that these non-English speaking youngsters are new to the United States, and some of them are. However, 80% of the children of immigrants were born in the United States, or approximately 3/4 ELLs were born in the United States, are U.S. citizens, to begin school and kindergarten in the first grade. 21% of all U.S. 5 to 17-year-olds speak language more than English at home, and 5% speak English with difficulty. Many of them also lack basic skills in the language spoken at home, which makes it more difficult to teach them English at school. The government response: students whose native language is not English constitute one of the most conspicuous failure groups in the U.S. educational system. Because of their difficulty in speaking, writing, and understanding English, many of these EL students fall farther and farther behind in school, and overwhelming numbers drop out before finishing high school. To cope with this problem, Congress passed the Bilingual Education Act of 1968 and subsequently amended it a number of times, provided federal funds to develop bilingual programs. Much of the expansion of bilingual programs in the 1970s can be attributed in its course. Um, as a result of the U.S. Federal Civil Rights Guidelines for the remedies, the guidelines specify that adult minority students should be taught academics, primary home lounge, and they could effectively benefit from English language instruction. Bilingual education modules. Students with native language in English have two goals in learning: English and mastering content language programs, or ELS, are two types focus developing literacy in the English language. The traditional model provides intensive English language instruction, but students get some portion of their academic instruction in their native language. The goal is to prepare students for regular classes in English without letting them fall behind in subject areas. In theory, students should transition out of these programs within a few years. Bilingual education controversies. Choosing the best method for educating students who need to learn English has become a diverse political battle. In the early 1970s, the language minority speakers and their advocates fought for bilingual education as their right. Today, however, many of them are expressing doubts about the effectiveness of bilingual programs. Civil rights and cultural issues are giving way to concerns of non-native English speakers are just now sufficiently mastering the English language, which in turn is keeping them from fully participating in American life. Although many educators believe students whose English second language should be educated in their native language as well, critics insist such as approach doesn't work. The critics believe that both best path to academic achievement for language minority students in most cases is to learn English and learn it quickly. Too many bilingual programs say they place EL students into slower learning tracks where they rarely learn sufficient English and from which they never emerge. These critics basically support an immersion of module bilingual education opposing traditional maintenance of models. No Child Left Behind in English Language Learners. Elementary of the Secondary Education Act, ESEA, reauthorized as the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, provides for federal grant money to state education agencies for the purposes of helping to ensure that the English proficient children develop high levels of academic attachment in English and meant to the same student academic achievement standards all the children are expected to meet. The No Child Left Behind legislation requires that the ELL students be tested at least once a year using the test chosen by each state. Like other students, ELL students must meet targets for adequate yearly progress or the schools will be labeled as failing. Students who have been in U.S. school systems will be in their states and EL students in their own language of most states and elect to do, and because of that. Multiple intelligence. Howard Gardner, a leading psychologist, proposes that we should move toward educating multiple intelligence, which Leslie and analogy, weakness, and unique combination of abilities. Gardner states that people at least 8 distinct intellectual capabilities that are used to approach problems and create product who has been captivities and they have improved problems create eventually. Many of our schools tend to emphasize a curriculum that specifically targets the predominantly linguistic and logical mathematical abilities students need to do well on commonly used standardized tests and to de-emphasize or exclude other possible intelligence. This constricted focus on limited range of abilities and the results um, children who are strong in linguistic and logical mathematical ways. Other children, even although may speak very competent or even gifted in non-traditional schools tasks, may experience frustration or failure in school. In Gardner's theory, abilities in diverse areas in which you are valued indicators of intelligence would be considered worthy of furthermore and development in school. Okay. Differing learning styles. Another approach to individual abilities. The approach to individual abilities and differences is the theory of learning styles. A learning styles approach to teaching and learning is based on the idea that all students have strengths and abilities, but each student may have a preferred way of using these abilities. Whereas Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence centers on the content and product of learning and its roots in the effort to rethink the theory of measurable intelligence learning styles and theory addresses difference in the process of learning in different ways people would think and the way they solve problems, create products, and interact. A number of theories and models of learning styles exist. One approach looks at 4 modalities for learning: visual, seeing, auditory, hearing, kinetic, moving, and tactical touching. This approach is based on the idea that people prefer different models of learning. For example, some people learn better by reading visual. A learning styles approach is a teaching and currently considerable attention education, although a few schools strictly and strictly any one model to approach of being applied is varying. Teaching implications. Rather than label students as having particular learning style, many educators argue that curriculum and instruction should offer varied lessons that appeal to a range of strengths, abilities, and learning preference over time. Teachers need to um, assessment methods to reach all students. Flexibility and variety of the keys. Don't assume that all students learn the way that you do, and don't undervalue students just because their learning style is different from yours. Differentiated instruction is described what is taught. Chapter 5 is a powerful way to address academic diversity. Technology can also help teachers effectively vary their instruction and assessment methods as teachers become more familiar with new technology. Many are making use of wikis and blogs, probes and centers, concept mapping tools, podcasts, internet sites, and other multimedia tools that offer students varied ways to access materials and learning experiences. Students with disabilities. Within the range of diversity, your students will display some of you have disabilities. You may encounter the many types of disabilities. For example, you may have students with method retardation, emotional disturbance, learning disabilities, attention deficit disorders, speech or language impairments, multiple handicaps, traumatic brain injuries or orthopedic impairments, visual impairments or blindness, and hearing impairments or deafness.